So I wanted to talk about something that I've been thinking about a lot and a pitfall that I have fallen into so many times. And when I point this out, it seems as if it's obvious. It seems as if we already know this. And this is where the deception is. So, the whole perspective of like looking at other spiritual teachers and trying to figure out what they know, and people being enlightened and people not being enlightened, and the more we get into communities and the more like YouTube teachers or whatever teachers we become familiar with, and the more we try to figure it all out, like what levels of understanding people are at, and all of this ends up being a really sneaky way to keep feeling crappy yourself. So there's no way out from this than to just become very aware and very curious about how you're still sort of like holding this perspective of you being the knower and the one who knows, even within the realm of not knowing. So there's only one source, and that's truly what you are. And so nobody can actually awaken. That's the whole paradox of it. And I'm not saying to just like forget and just like, we all notice things, we all feel and sense things, and we all can sort of like think back to where we were on the path and recognize. And if we couldn't, then we wouldn't be able to teach. And yet this whole teaching thing really is it's a big sham. And it's also one of the most incredible pleasures in life. And I wanted to be 100% honest about the fact that these videos and making them really deepens my own understanding. In fact, like a recent video I made, I just came home and laughed and cried because as I focused on the subject and I started explaining it in a clear way that, I think I'm doing it because other people can understand it that way. I start to explore it and continue to focus on it for so long that I start to see things and start to understand things that I didn't know I understood before. And so you shouldn't like turn yourself into a teacher in order to hold an image of yourself as somebody who knows and there being people who don't know. But if you can express this and do YouTube, journaling, blogging, just talking to other people about it who are open, it's because you can, if when you get really like trained how things feel and you start like seeing other people and seeing this as like some great thing that's gonna transcend everything and save the world, and you start preaching to people, it starts to feel really off. But when you're just sort of like expressing it kind of freely and like to people who are interested in this stuff, it takes you deeper. And it's sort of an amazing effect of focusing. But I've just been so shocked by how often I've fallen into this perspective of like really wanting to see myself as somebody who gets it and like look back at myself and like have a thought of myself as somebody who understands, and not realizing like what a leaning tower of Pisa. Well, I guess that's stood a long time. That's a horrible analogy. But what a like house built upon the sand that is, because you have to put so much effort into maintaining that all the time. And that's what feels awful to do. And so I read a whole book by a spiritual teacher all about like figuring out how deep other spiritual teachers' understandings were, and a bunch of other stuff. And there's like, you can really go into this, and I hate to say it's a distraction, because if I say it's a distraction, then it sort of implies that there's something to focus on. And in reality, that's awareness, and that's what feels right to you. And don't, the thing with it is it prevents us from being curious, from exploring, from really being willing to see the things about us that are shockingly surprising, causing these sort of like patterns of thought and thought loops and suffering, and keeping us away from source. And all of it, there's so many ways to perpetuate a self, and it's almost like the further you go with spirituality and the further you go with non-duality, the more ridiculous those attempts start to seem. And sometimes I'm completely taken aback by how I'm just like, oh, I just want to be out of this. I don't want to be in this world at all. It's too weird. And I just get like entirely shaken up. And yet, even that's like bringing in the sort of drama into like making some sort of like, you have to have the drama to keep the story running. And so sometimes that kind of drama is just like covering over a reluctance to go into what's mundane, what we think is mundane, but really where all the magic that we're seeking within thought lives. Lately, I've also made it into this sort of like dramatic story of how I feel as if other people just don't understand me. Like, I realize that I make absolutely no sense. And so translating it is an incredibly difficult thing, and you realize that you can't translate it. Like I said in another video, mind cannot communicate with mind, and thought cannot know a thought. There has to be awareness. There's no such thing as mind, there's just a thought, and there has to be awareness of a thought. And ultimately, it's all not two. But people talk about the message as being energetic, and it is. It's like an inexplicable, magical thing that you cannot do, you cannot enforce on anyone. And we cannot make ourselves happy. We cannot secure happiness, and we cannot make somebody else happy. We cannot secure happiness for them. And happiness is not something that we can have, and it's not something that we can lose. And so when your entire thought structure is based on the understanding that there is someone who can have happiness, then the realization of it being prior to that thought, being the awareness of it itself, and completely free of any resistance to it. None of the words make any sense unless you've already put out some kind of desire to understand and to know this, some sort of surrender. It's where desire and surrender merge and become one thing.